pub crawl in the 80s. As a group of young male friends and acquaintances, it was customary to mark a life event such as a birthday or a stag do, or for any other reason, with a pub crawl in Hazel Grove. The format was to all gather at the Bull's Head, which was situated on the corner of Torkington Road and Buxton Road, the notoriously busy A6, and then walk down towards Stockport, stopping at as many hostelries as possible. Mark, Paddy and I were members of the same bowling club, and during one of our matches I remarked that we had not been on one of these for some time and we should arrange one. Mark agreed to contact the regulars, and he said that Stevie, who was his squash partner, would like to come. As many as you like, I said. It's nothing special, it's just a lad's night out. Some 12 people gathered at the Bull's Head and set off on the crawl. Normally the group would split up into subgroups to avoid expensive rounds. So naturally us four with our acquaintance did that, while maintaining our place within the gang itself. The crawl began and the group snaked along the road to the first stop, the White Hart. Quite a traditional pub this, very busy as usual on a Friday night and a bit smoky. We weren't the only pub crawl in town. It was my kind of pub because, as a Stockport lad, I developed a taste for Robinson's beer. Not everybody had, of course. Some were drinking lager. Next stop was across the busy A6, which was a bit hairy, but the 3 Tons beckoned. Another old traditional pub with a long history. I knew of it because the local pigeon racing club, of which my father-in-law was a member, had their headquarters there. Back across the A6 to our next stop, the Horse and Jockey. The facade was quite traditional, but the interior was more of a modern drinking place, complete with pool table and fruit machines. Not as busy here, that shows you the customer preference. The 4 of us were relaxing into a good mood, but the drinking pace was slowing somewhat. We even had a go on the fruit machine. Any winnings, of course, were ploughed back in the hopes of big wins. The false hopes of a gambler. The group had slimmed down now, and a few more decided to spend the remaining time in this more modern environment. Time was passing, and we were getting closer to what I regarded as the main event of the evening, a Ruby Murray in the Kismet. I could almost taste it. Time for one last drink. Back across the road to the Woodman. Only the 4 of us still standing. Well, just. Definitely a more modern establishment, with very few customers, mostly locals. To me, it was just 2 rooms and a bar, but it was a pub. Soon it was time to go. But as I took my glass back to the bar, I spotted a bottle of Wood's 100 rum on a shelf. This is where I made my first big mistake of the evening. I heard myself say to the barmaid, 4 rums, please. Mark said, hey, that's good. Another 4, please. I'm not sure, but I think Paddy did likewise. Stevie, not a big drinker, stared at us in amazement. Welcome to a Reddish Boys Friday night out, I chortled. The crawl now became more of a stagger towards the Kismet. In fact, we began to think we may not make it. We arrived and the aroma was intense. The Kismet was a typical curry restaurant with a small bar near the door. Downstairs in the main dining area, the tables opposite the bar were in alcoves, decorated with the obligatory flock wallpaper. We were shown to a table at the rear behind the stairs. The anticipation was growing when the menu was proffered. We ordered poppadoms and chutney and starters. I recall my own starters being boona prawn with pori. These dishes arrived promptly and were devoured quickly. The evening started to go downhill from here. We waited a long time for the mains. Waited and waited and waited. And we began to mutter to ourselves about the service and to anybody who would listen. I decided to chance the stairs to go to the loo. And for some reason I put on my summer jacket. Clinging onto the stair rail, I managed it upstairs. As I came down, I made the second major mistake of the night. After a cursory glance around the restaurant, completely ignoring the area behind the stairs, I decided that my companions had left without me. I was disgusted. I marched straight out the front door and set off to walk in the direction of Stockport. I was now in full grumbling mode. The following morning when I awoke, I tried to piece together the events of the previous night. I couldn't remember having a curry. I can remember being abandoned though. I went downstairs and my wife said, "What did you get up to last night then?" I told her about my so-called friends. Paddy's phoned and said, "Are you okay?" Because according to him, it was you who deserted them and didn't pay for your meal. I decided to ring Paddy, and he told me that after I'd left, Mark fell asleep head first into his jalfrezi, and Stevie declared he didn't have enough money to pay. Paddy had been forced to pay the bill for all 4 meals. I realised that I'd caused a lot of trouble. He said Stevie had called and paid. Mark would do the same as me, and the 3 of us met up in the club and settled our dues. Mark and myself paid Paddy's share for his inconvenience. We 3 went to Old Trafford to watch Man United play and had plenty to talk about and laugh. Mark, Paddy and I are still friends to this day, and as far as I know, Stevie's still playing squash. The moral of this story has got to be, keep Barry away from Woods Run.
My life in flower arranging. I moved to Stockport in 1970 while expecting my first child, and gardening, flowers and green things, plus outdoor activities have always featured largely in my life. As my children became adults, my daughter encouraged me to join a flower club. So I joined Stockport Afternoon Flower Club and subsequently trained at night school, together with a jolly, helpful, talented bunch of ladies, a marvellous teacher, Christine, and gained my diploma. Flowers became an absorbing part of my life, visiting shows and taking part in competitions. Doing the flowers can mean all sorts of things, like creating art forms, competition classes, floral tributes, or a simple vase for the home. At Christmas, flower clubs and groups decorate different rooms at Bramhall Hall, depicting an overall theme. Our team displayed the Victorian parlour, with a sea scene on the billiard table, complete with galleon and crocodile, while Captain Hook surveyed all. My engaged daughter Alison phoned me one day in 2008. We exchanged the usual family gossip, and then she dropped the bombshell. "Mum, we have booked the wedding venue. Will you do the flowers?" I was so excited until I remembered my experience with wedding flowers was very limited, especially when she told me that the wedding venue was a large hotel on the Welsh border beyond Shrewsbury, a long way from Stockport and away from my usual suppliers if I needed it. But how I longed to do this. Plans had to be made. She and her fiancé would discuss colour schemes and placements of flowers, etc. They decided to have 3 bridesmaids, 2 large pedestal displays, flowers on several tables for guests, plus arrangements for the top table. Oh, don't forget the bride's bouquet, buttonholes for the groom, and several menfolk. "By the way, Mum, I'd love you to make my wedding dress." Because I am very short, I made my own wedding dress, plus my sister-in-law's dress and various bridesmaids' dresses, so I knew this request would be made. More plans were made. Alison came back to Stockport and we chose dress fabrics from a marvellous fabric warehouse, while a visit to a recommended floral wholesaler, the Dutchman, made us stop and stare at what seemed to be a sea of all the beautiful flower colours you could imagine. So difficult to describe. My daughter's wedding choices of late summer and autumn tones to suit the August wedding were discussed and would be available when required. We soon realised that our estate car was probably not large enough to carry all the flower arrangements safely from Stockport to Wales. On Thursday evening, the table decorations and pedestal displays were completed. Bouquets were arranged and the flowers for buttonholes were planned and packed for Friday morning. Meanwhile, whilst I was doing all this work, my husband was solving the transport problem by fabricating a framework of shelves around the sides of the interior of the car. On Friday, having completed the remaining displays, careful driving and gentle braking brought us to the hotel. Thankful, tired, and very late, where we were made extremely welcome. Saturday morning was a busy round of meeting friends and family from the West Midlands, in between making buttonholes and placing arrangements and having my makeup done. The August weather had turned to a heat wave, and all flowers needed to be sprayed to keep them fresh. Life's not easy. Happily, all went well at the wedding. Her flowers looked great. Alison and Tim were married. My husband and I were tired, but serene, and I loved doing the flowers.
Hazel Grove car boot sale, indoor and outdoor market. The four of us nearly didn't make the car boot sale this January. All the different items packed in both cars. Barbara and I used my car, whilst Keith and Alex, my son, used their car. When we started out, it was only a light drizzle, but within a few minutes, there was a torrential downpour, which made it very difficult to drive in at a reduced speed. We were very lucky to get to Hazel Grove in one piece, with the windscreen wipers working overtime. It took us over 30 minutes to get there. Then we had to start unpacking the cars and get registered in the indoor market. If you've been to a car boot sale, as a customer, you would find it a very interesting place to be. But as a stall holder, it is completely different because you're on the other side of the fence and meet some interesting people. The atmosphere before the start of the boot sale is different because depending on the items and goods you have on your stall, the other stall holders will come and have a look to see what you have. That is when you get to know the types of people there and maybe strike up a relationship. I've never been to a car boot sale before, which was a new experience for me. I started chatting to one of the stall holders, Sharon, who explained it to me. It was like having a bring and buy sale. I did try to sell some items on eBay, but found the car boot sale a lot easier. She came over to our stall the first time to see what we had there and bought several James Bond vehicles that had sound effects. I asked her why she collected them. Some were for her collection, the others for the grandchildren. It grew from there, and each time we went back, she was a very enthusiastic and knowledgeable customer. I had 2 sets of Queen Elizabeth II coins from the London Mint. One set was all gold. The second set was gold on one side and hand-painted on the other, and she knew all about that type of coins. I asked for £50, knowing I wouldn't get that, and she gave me £30, which is what I had in mind in the first place. It is not open for long, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m, just 3 hours. The stalls are set up before then between 8 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. If the other stall holders like what's on yours, you could have more than half your items gone before it actually opens. There are many different types of people attending car boot sales. Those looking for a bargain as a present for someone's birthday, perhaps. There are also those who want to buy something as cheaply as possible. This is just an example to show you what I mean. If a small item is priced at 30 pence, who only wants to pay 20 pence. I have a name for that type of person, but I'm not going to say it here. I've been to 3 car boot sales so far as a stallholder, and each one is completely different, which is as it should be, showing the encapsulated facets of life. This is the best place for me to sell anything and everything without any hassle.
Friday night at the Baker's Vaults. Smoke, noise, and sweaty bodies were what greeted me at the Baker's Vaults every Friday night in the 70s. Of these 3, the noise was what I was there for, and this was provided by Paul the trombone and his jazz group. This was cutting-edge jazz, and everyone was excited by it. There was no chance to take in the architecture of the Bakers, but the place emanated history and age. The bar stretched the full length of the room, and it was made of aged mahogany. The pumps shone with the brightness of polished brass and copper. A vast array of glasses, bright bubbles of optics, and exotic labels were to be scrutinised or admired during the long wait to be served, which was inevitable given the size of the Friday night crowd. One guy looked particularly small behind the bar, and someone remarked on this. My companion set him straight by saying, "No, he's standing in a ditch." The crowd was made up of mainly older people, mostly male. The jazz would carry on into the night, but at a point around 11:30, it had to stop because of the licensing laws that pertained in those days. Calls of "Have you no homes to go to?" or "Let's have your glasses, please," rang out as the dyed-in-the-wool jazz enthusiasts crowded round the band while they packed up their chiming instruments and their electrical equipment. Here's a terrible photo of Paul the trombone and his band. And here's a photo of the then young man called Mike Hall, who showed promise. But learning from his elders, Mike was shy and diffident back then. He's now an elderly big cheese at the Royal College of Music. On one occasion at the Bakers, my companion and I were lucky enough to get a seat and a table. It was late in the evening and we'd been enjoying Paul the trombone and his band. An elderly guy was trying to get to the exit via a slow-moving queue. He decided to pass the time in idle chat with us. We were seated, he was standing. He was smoking, we didn't smoke. As drunks often do, he quickly moved into his philosophy of life and started making pronouncements such as, "You've got to look on the bright side," and "God remembers his own." The most memorable of these aphorisms to us, after he'd asked my companion's name and after being told it was Roy, was, "There's nothing like life, Ron." During these statements, a considerable amount of ash was dropping from his cigarette onto Roy's good jacket, and he nonchalantly brushed this off, together with the occasional spark, while he was talking. Roy looked up at him benignly, knowing that this was all bound to pass. Just then, a tough-looking woman came alongside, grabbed our philosopher, and began to drag him by the arm towards the door, telling him off in loud and brutal terms. He looked back and called out to my companion, "How would you like to be married to that, Ron?" We never saw him again, but the phrase stuck with us in our lexicon of Stockport expressions, and we used it for the next 45 years whenever the opportunity arose. "How would you like to be married to that?" was applied to the security police woman at the airport who confiscated Roy's fruit knife, the bus driver who refused to take a fiver, and the woman in the laundrette who didn't give out change even to put in her own machines. Each time we used it, we remembered our meeting with the baker's philosophy, with amusement and affection. I believe there's still music at the baker's, but I wonder if the bar staff are still standing in a ditch and whether the jazz is still as good. I doubt it, but I might be wrong.
Our house in the 60s. I was born in December 1960 and we moved to our 2 up, 2 down with outside toilet, bath in the kitchen around 1964. It seemed like a palace compared to the 1 up, 1 down situated in a courtyard with a communal toilet that we previously lived in. This new home had its own front and rear gardens. The front garden, with steps leading up from the pavement, was only small and too dangerous to play in, as the house was situated on the corner of a busy junction between Turncroft Lane and New Zealand Road. It was, however, big enough for the lollipop man, as we used to call him, to store his school crossing patrol stick in. My brother and I used to watch him through the window, come into our garden every weekday, morning and afternoon, to collect it and put it back, wearing his white coat and white hat with black plastic peak. No matter how many times we knocked on the window and waved to him, he never once waved back or even acknowledged our presence. We thought he was a miserable old git. He could have at least smiled. After all, it was our garden, not his. My brother, who was a year younger than me, drew a nasty face on his lollipop to show our disgust of his ignorance. The back garden, however, was huge, far bigger than the whole house. It had a high brick wall which ran down the whole length of the garden. On the other side of the wall was a bus stop leading down New Zealand Road. I remember one morning a wagon from Peak Trailers across the road on the other side of the junction had crashed into the wall and knocked part of it down. Not knowing this, my brother, who used to wet the bed, had gone outside to use the toilet, having removed his wet pyjama bottoms. He came running back into the house crying because a queue of women at the bus stop had seen him half naked. It amused me all day. The house was situated between Woodbank Park and Stockport Market. Being so close to the park, it gave us a great vantage point for watching Stockport Carnival end its procession at the park with a fun fair. Although we never got to attend the fair, as money was very tight, and luxuries such as fun fairs weren't affordable. Occasionally, our mum would take us to the park to play and to visit the museum next to the park entrance, because both activities were free. We visited the market more than the park, so my mother could buy bread from a little bakery at the market and groceries from the market stalls. I never liked the trips to the market because the smell of hops from Robinson's brewery hung in the air like old, sweaty woolen socks. But I did like it when we saw the Shire horses, either in their stables behind the market or pulling carts full of beer barrels. We attended the local parish church primary school just down the road, close to the market. The school playground looked out onto the main market road and was at least 8 foot up from the pavement below, secured with high railings which still stand today, only they don't seem so high now I'm grown. I remember the day the Queen drove past our school and we were all stood waiting at the railings for a glimpse of the Queen of England as she visited Stockport. A convoy of black, shiny cars came driving past, and then came the biggest, shiniest black car with a flag waving wildly on its roof. It had huge, immaculately gleaming windows, which allowed us all to see its interior, and there she was, sat on white seating as big as a couch, smiling and waving at the crowds of people gathered in the road below our playground and to us children above, so happy to see her. To me, she just looked like an ordinary woman in a pretty floral dress with a nice hairdo. She looked very humble and gentle, not powerful at all. I'd only ever seen her on black and white television, wearing her crown and robes. From that day on, every time I saw the Queen on television, I would think to myself, I have seen her in real life and feel very privileged. I continued to thrive at the local parish school and felt elevated to a whole new dimension when I was taught to read. The written word fascinated me and connected me to a part of me that nothing else could touch. I now know that's my soul. Sadly, I had to leave my first school a few years later when our 2 up, 2 down was deemed structurally unsafe because the aeroplane that crashed a matter of yards from our home and school on Waterloo Road had clipped our roof on its descent and taken the chimney stack clean off. I didn't really understand the severity of the situation at the time and what an enormous tragedy it was that would stay with the town for many, many years to come. My mother, like many others, had rushed to the crash site to offer any assistance she could. I was staying over at my nana's house at the time and only witnessed the devastation on my nana's colour television. That didn't make any difference, as the scene was thick with heavy clouds of grey smoke and dust rising from mounds of rubble and carnage strewn across the ground. Men with dirty faces, wearing braces, with shirt sleeves rolled up, did what they could to assist the emergency services find survivors, which, miraculously, there were. My mother handed out cups of tea and blankets to the volunteers working tirelessly to help. It was a day that Stockport will never forget. We moved to a 3-bedroomed house with dining room, inside toilet and upstairs bathroom in Heaton Moor, on a road with open lawns outside each identical looking house, set back from the busy A6. I missed our old life and the hustle-bustle of market life and character. Things would never be the same again.